The collapse of communism. A foregone conclusion in the minds of many of us, I know. The fact that once the first domino fell, the entire Warsaw Pact basically imploded within the space of a decade is hardly surprising, because, as we have all come to realise, communism doesn't work. Most communist places collapse under the weight of their own failed ideology. But there was one place where their little revolution was, ironically, revolted against, and a tyrannical despot was removed from his position in the big chair. And just like he himself had condoned and ordered for many of his own people, he was taken out the back and shot. And the entire thing, from the moment the uprising happened, right up until he had his back against the wall, was all caught on camera. The Ceausescu Boogaloo. Please leave a like and a comment on this video because it really helps me in the algorithm. Something is tickling my nostrils. What is it, I wonder? Is it the homely notes of grandmother's cooking? Is it the pleasant aromas typical for that one fair maiden you've been courting of late? Nay, my dearest child. My dearest child, it is none of those things. It is instead today's delectable sponsor, Fume. Fume is a name that needs no introduction, but for those of you who don't know, Fume is the gold standard in flavoured air devices with one simple objective: to decouple you from that one bad habit of yours. With a sturdy, supple and suckable wooden frame, you can grasp it and handle it securely, being able to wrap your lips around it without the fear of any undesired sensations. But of course, engulfing the tip with your sensual smoochers is only half of the battle. You're going to want to suck it. And for that, Fume has got you covered, as Fume has a wide array of fantastic fruity flavours to coat your throat in. Crisp mint for a sharp and succinct flavour, to cinnamon hearts for the flowery and endearing ones among you. There is a vast catalogue of tastes for you to sample and swallow. Me personally, well, I like my flavours like I like my men. Black licorice. It even has built-in fidget capabilities so you can stimulate the shaft whilst you suck. So grab that old vape and kick it to the curb, because you can do better, girl. You need only scan the QR code or go to tryfume.com/Dankula to get a free topper when you order your journey pack. Again, scan the QR code on the screen or go to tryfume.com/Dankula to get a free topper when you order your journey pack. And now, thankfully, back to the video. Romania. You know, the country. That little Latin enclave in southeastern Europe that just aggressively exists doing absolutely nothing but being the paranormal meme Balkan country that bucks the trend by speaking malformed Italian. With spooky forests that are totally haunted and definitely not scenic oases of nature, alongside having an even spookier people. Famously being the birthplace of a more famous fictitious count that was based off of a guy that was renowned for his love of Turks. And turning them into shish kebabs. Well, that's all elementary, I know. But apparently Romania has a lot more to it than what I just said. Indeed, despite only being a united and independent country since 1878, it has a rich tapestry of history, national epics, a flourishing art scene, and all of the fixtures of a normal white country. They're not even gypsies. They just steal because they're mean. It's fascinating, isn't it? Well, too bad I'm not covering any of that because we need to stay focused. Instead, we'll be pulling a boomer move and ignoring all of that history and instead start in the post-World War II paradigm. Romania was on the no-no side of the war because they hedged their bets on the Reddit Germans stomping the Soviets, to which they did initially. However, some issues famously arose. Amongst other things, everyone seemed to forget that seasons are a thing, and that they changed. They also forgot that logistics are actually quite important, especially when embarking on an unprecedented transcontinental war of annihilation. Romania helped so far as they had some precious yummy oil alongside having a good amount of bodies to soak up Lend-Leased munitions, famously being a not insignificant part of the famous Lads' Day Out at Stalingrad. Naturally, these two features made them a prime target for forced liberation, with their oil fields being struck by bombing campaigns and their country being overwhelmed by a literal red wave. Despite the government being couped by King Michael and brought out of the Axis in 1944, it was too late, because Romania's fate was sealed. Here comes communism. So, how was the newly founded communist Romania? Well, it was a fucking shithole, of course, but in 1965, famed literally who Giorgio Dej relinquished himself from the position of General Secretary by dying of lung cancer. Fun fact, he also kept a rock on his desk that was made of fucking uranium. I wonder what happened there, but anyway, regardless, his position ended up in the lap of our man of the hour, Nicolae Ceausescu. And due to his subsequent rule, Romania ended up in a very unique club of communist nations that fucking hated the Soviets. You see, like Tito's Yugoslavia or Mao's China, Big Nick didn't exactly get along with the leadership in Moscow, due to, amongst other reasons, their rather involved nature with internal unrest in fellow proletarian republics, alongside more generally the less than ideal nature of their liberation by the Red Army, who were rather famous for taking the Conan the Barbarian approach to non-combatant women. So, why bring this up? Well, it's under these circumstances that Big Nick was able to flex a degree of autonomy, like their neighbours in Yugoslavia and Albania, but within the Warsaw Pact. The path chosen was heavily inspired by his trips to China and True Korea. Seeing the peculiar fusion of communist doctrine and hardline ultranationalism manifested in China as the Cultural Revolution and the Great Leap Forward, with the entire country seemingly whipped up into an ideological frenzy, destroying their own heritage, killing sparrows, and melting spoons in their back gardens. They were truly united and as equal as any communist utopia claims and yearns to be. I mean, they were united in fucking starvation and all equally worthless in the eyes of the state, sure, but that's not the point. As far as Big Nick was concerned, Chang and Kim were cooking, especially that Kim guy. That Juki shit is wild. They've got market stalls where the food never rots or expires, and everyone is always smiling, to the point where it looks like it hurts. How the fuck do they do that? True Korea evidently has got it all figured out and is definitely not faking it to save face. That would be absurd. Indeed, Nick was convinced that the path forward for his country was to be a flavour of vaguely Maoist reformism. Sort of like his Scottish pal Onvar in Albania, or that enigmatic Tito fellow in the Reddit war crime meme country. Or even Old Janos in Magyar-occupied Pannonia, which is Hungary. Because the Balkans have just always been weird like that. With the only exception being once again Bulgaria, bucking the trend and being the regional contrarian by actually liking the Soviets at gunpoint and towing the Second World Standard. So, back on topic. How was Nicolae Ceausescu and his plucky regime? Well, It was definitely a Maoist state, that is for damn sure, with Judaisms abound in what I could best describe as a Balkanoid bargain bin true Korea. Or I guess, the other Balkanoid bargain bin true Korea, because Enver Hoxha's Albania. Regardless, it was not one to be outdone by some pseudo-Illyrian bunker chud. Because Nick came out swinging with the signature economic hardships, weird mismanagement of resources and planning, and an extremely nutty cult of personality, with enough pomp, scuffed self-portraits, and self-glazing to make the Kim family blush. And then unperson half of their propaganda ministry for being one-upped by a random Eastern European backwater, most well known for rapey old men in capes and stealing tyres. I mean, sure, the Potemkin village is pretty cool, but Nicky literally tore down an entire district alongside most of the centre of Bucharest, tearing down around 10,000 homes and evicting tens of thousands of people just to build a fucking grand palace befitting a Habsburg, so that the government, him, could efficiently wield the levers of power. He autistically hyperfixated on every minute detail of its construction, supposedly visiting the construction site up to 3 times a week, which honestly would be absolutely terrible if not for the fact that this building utterly architecture mogs any other contemporary building erected in the Internationale. The building was in fact so beautiful that famed wasp cackle demon Rupert Murdoch tried to buy it in 1990. Thankfully for the Romanians, he failed. And in a probable fit of rage, he presumably orchestrated the collapse of Yugoslavia, the reunification of Germany, and kick-started the dissolution of communism in the Soviet Union. All because he couldn't buy a house in fucking Romania. Of course, sometimes bread and circuses can only get you so far, because it turns out that the people of Romania weren't actually too fond of their dear leader. A harsh policy of austerity was put in place with no end in sight, paired with the rather extravagant spending habits of old Nicky, which resulted in the proles and apparatchiks alike getting rather miffed about the whole state of affairs. And before you know it, there were calls to do away with the entire system altogether. But what was to be done? How about protesting? Did they try protesting? Well, yeah, they did. And like every other protest, it went absolutely nowhere. So, in literally 1984, a plot was brewing among some disgruntled party members and their officers in the military. A coup was to take place. The date was set for between the 15th and 17th of October that very same year, during Big Nick's state visit to the degenerate capitalist hellscape called West Germany. So, how did the coup fare? Well, it had to get cancelled. Because, and I'm being completely serious here, the unit that was meant to carry out the governmental seizure got assigned to oversee the corn harvests. The fucking military got their coup plot foiled because they were forced to watch corn be picked. With the military somehow failing, another cheek clencher for the Romanian Politburo came in 1989, when the town of Brasov was hit particularly hard by the government policy of austerity. It turns out people don't like breadlines. That's what Slavs do, and we're not fucking Slavs, are we? As such, on November the 15th, during a local election, they went out for yet another protest at a local truck manufacturing plant. This quickly escalated and resulted in the plant and city hall being sacked and the food stores scoured, with a bonfire being erected. Oh gosh golly gee whiz, something might actually happen for once, except no, not really, as Securitat came in and laid all of the protesters the fuck out. Who in God's name is Securitat? Well, it's a communist country and the organisation's name sounds an awful lot like security, so be a smart sausage and put 2 and 2 together. Either way, Brasov was a bust. Or was it? It seemed that by this point, people were getting fed up with Nick. And though Brasov didn't really go anywhere, it seemingly served as partial inspiration for the masses, because just 2 years later, the Romanian people followed the trend of the Second World by properly kicking off all across the country in December of 1989. For real this time. No clickbait. So, what caused everything to finally come crashing down? Well, it was the obvious political repression and, well, austerity. Okay, it's not quite that. It was more so that Nicky kept austerity and rationing in place and unchanged, despite having achieved the austerity plan's goal of literally paying off the entire country's external national debt of around 11 billion US dollars, or adjusted for inflation, 28 billion US dollars. Which is admittedly fucking unheard of in this day and age. A country with no outstanding debts. No wonder they got them. We can't be having a nation that is not shackled to its crippling debts. Who are those debts to? Don't worry about it. Starting in Timisoara, the flames of revolution were fanned when the government tried to evict and functionally detain political dissident and Hungarian Calvinist pastor Laszlo Toks. They then found out that targeting a priest is almost universally a way to piss off the entire local community. So, in retaliation, the community started rioting, resulting in the building housing the local party official being almost burned to the ground. In response, Securitat showed up and tried to lay them out flat again with tear gas and their spooky secret police aura. But it didn't really work this time. The crowd was simply too big and too angry. So, the military had to get called in. Surprisingly, the crowd didn't back down and gunfights ensued on the streets, with APCs being called in to assist the state in containing the unfurling chimp out. After 2 days of fighting, the military managed to cordon off and contain the area right in time for Nicky to fuck off on a state visit to Iran, with the matter of containing and crushing the anti-government conflict being handed over to his wife Elena, whom, by complete coincidence, was the Deputy Prime Minister. Wow, what are the chances of that? Needless to say, this was far too much egg on the face of the government. No amount of wiping or frantic licking could possibly get it off. Seeing the writing on the wall, Nicky, instead of retreating into his shell, promptly came back from Iran and gave a speech on December 21st. Hoping to avoid having the yoke of power offset and squarely condemn the riots in Timisoara. The only issue is the fact that Big Nick severely underestimated just how hated he truly was, as the overwhelming majority of the 100,000 people that he was addressing were quite literally forced to show up at gunpoint, and they were also given pictures of him to brandish on camera alongside performing a stunted clap and chant. However, something indeed started happening. During the speech in Bucharest, there was a full-blown uprising underway, with the city being host to battles between government loyalists and basically everyone else, including solid chunks of the military who had actually defected because they were fed up with being oppressive tools of the state, and they were also fed up of picking fucking corn. The sight of tanks in the streets was rather commonplace. However, despite that, the writing was on the wall for anyone inside the city. Nick Ceausescu is finished. The capital of his country is an active war zone, and it's quite clear that his side was losing. But of course, he doesn't know that yet. But oh Lord, was he about to find out. During his speech, the astroturfed crowd started to pipe up in mocking jeers and also calling for his removal and or death. He tried to control the crowd by raising his right hand and using his communist mind powers, but that didn't work. Eventually, the crowd got more and more agitated to the point that midway through the speech, amongst the screeching and shouting of the crowd, that Nick was not only alone atop the podium, but also absolutely fucking hated by almost every single person in the country. And we have it on camera. The massive mob of about 100,000 people charged and started storming the building. And you can actually see the look on Nick's face. I love this footage so much. I love it when an authoritarian realises it's so over. You can actually see the specific moment where he realises that he's fucked.
Populare din București, considerând aceasta ca o
deciding that it was now in his best interest to get the fuck out of Romania after 2 more attempts to reason with the crowd and get his own soapbox Lenin moment, he decided to scarper away. Though not before sacking his defence minister, Vasily Milea, for treason, apparently, because among other things, Milea hesitated to having troops open fire on the unarmed protesters. Vasily ended up accidentally committing suicide after apparently shooting himself with one of his attendants' guns. The hope was that being incapacitated by a grievous yet non-fatal wound would result in him being relieved of duty, and thus able to slink away from the limelight. Except the idiot fucking hit a major artery and he bled out. So, with the defence minister dead, Big Nick decided to quickly assign the role to one of his very trusted associates, Victor Stanislescu. However, it turned out that Victor actually secretly fucking hated Big Nick the entire time. So, as soon as Big Nick gave him the position, Victor just said, "Thanks," and immediately ordered all of the soldiers to stand down and just let all of the rioters into the building. He then informed Nick and Elena that their best course of action was to quickly flee by helicopter due to the massive horde of rioters who were now storming the building. But why? Well, doing that technically made Nick and Elena fugitives of the law. And frankly, Victor wanted Nick and his wife put against the wall and shot like those he had killed before, rather than torn to pieces and lynched by the proles. So, now in the air, Nick and Elena, alongside 4 others, were crammed into the back of a helicopter meant for only 4 passengers. They were en route to the village of Snagov, and upon touching down, Nick ordered his men to get 2 helicopters filled to the brim with armed guards. Nick was then very kindly told that he was all the fuck alone, he wasn't in charge anymore, and he was to wind his fucking neck in, due to the fact that there was a literal fucking revolution happening. Getting back in the helicopter, Nick and Elena started making their way to T2. The only issue was that the rogue military units in the area instituted a no-fly zone and forced the chopper to land in the middle of a road near Peteste. Being out in the open, the loyalist bodyguards frantically tried to flag down any cars on the road to commandeer, eventually managing to get one such lucky comrade to stop and redistribute the ownership of his vehicle. The local doctor that was hailed was absolutely moulding at this, because he was now basically being held up at gunpoint to drive the widely hated dictator of his country during a nationwide manhunt for him. So he faked engine troubles and got them to fuck off. So another guy was flagged down who was a bit more willing to actually put up with Nick and Elena's whinging. And he drove them to Targoviste, where they could hide out in a farmer's institute on the edge of town. Upon arriving at the institute, the local director guided them to a secluded room and locked them inside. He then immediately called the police, and wouldn't you know it, the Ceausescus were now captured. Naturally, as is the case in many communist countries, they were put on trial almost immediately. They tried to make the kangaroo court seem a lot more impartial by phoning in a defence attorney for Nick and Elena. They somehow managed to find someone that was willing to entertain a client with a guaranteed guilty verdict. Being entirely blunt, the lawyer, Nico Teodorescu, told the two that the best they can hope for is avoiding the death penalty by way of pleading insanity. Nick then proceeded to showcase his insanity by telling the defence lawyer to fuck off and die, and he never spoke to him again. So, with the defence shored up, let's take a glance at the charges. And honestly, it's not that bad. It's just subversion of state power, destruction of public property, undermining the national economy, attempting to flee the country using over $1 billion deposited in foreign banks, and also genocide. So, did they do it? Well, yeah, they absolutely fucking did, but there wasn't any proof of this at the time. However, this was a communist country, so when it comes to evidence at a trial, they're not too bothered about that shit. So just 1 hour after beginning the trial, the sentencing was already over. Nicolae and Elena Ceausescu were found guilty of all the charges and sentenced to death. Fun fact, officially, Nick did actually have the legal right to appeal this decision. But due to the threat of loyalists interrupting the totally impartial course of justice, that measure was hand-waved. How convenient. The two guilty goobers were then brought outside, they had their hands tied behind their backs, and they were put up against the wall. Then, 8 paratroopers who were brought in by our old friend the Defence Minister Victor Stansilescu came in, stood in front of them, aimed their rifles and... Well, there is actually full video of what happened next, but obviously I can't show it on YouTube. Bang! And the dirt is gone. So where does that leave us? Well, the execution was actually broadcast on live television alongside the listing of his crimes. The loyalist forces quickly melted away due to their messiah passing on, and before you know it, Romania was now free of their crackpot communist dictator. But now they had to clean up after him, and depending on who you ask, they're still not done with that. So what was the point of this video? Well, to be honest, I saw the video of Ceausescu's last speech and I just found it fascinating how you can literally see the realisation crawling across his face in real time. Then from there, I started looking into him and then I ended up down another rabbit hole about how flimsy even the most airtight of states really can be when the going gets tough enough. Also, governments keep forgetting that there are a lot more of us than there are of them. Also, a lot of the shit with Little Nicky was, frankly, pretty funny. In summation, it can be done.
It's Count Dankula on YouTube. Everybody should subscribe.